Every morning the same sound floated into the air before most people even noticed it. Soft piano notes moved between the noise of traffic, footsteps, and distant conversations. People walked past with phones in their hands, coffee cups, busy thoughts, heavy worries. The music was there, but the man playing it was almost invisible. He sat beside an old upright piano placed near the edge of a public square. The paint on the piano had faded, and some keys were slightly worn, but when his fingers touched them, the instrument felt alive. His eyes did not follow the movement around him. They stayed still, calm, unfocused. A small folded cane rested beside his chair, a quiet sign that he could not see the world others rushed through every day. Some people dropped coins into the small box near the piano. Some paused for a few seconds and smiled politely before moving on. Many did not stop at all. To most, he was simply part of the background, like a streetlight or a bench that had always been there. But there was something different about the way he played. His music did not sound like random songs played for money. The melodies felt thoughtful, almost like conversations. Sometimes the notes were light and playful, and children passing by would slow down without understanding why. Other times the music carried a deep softness that made tired workers breathe a little slower. He never spoke much. When someone thanked him, he nodded gently. When someone asked if he knew a specific song, he listened to their voice first before answering. It was as if the sound of people mattered more to him than their words. He arrived at the same time every day. Someone from a nearby shop helped wheel the piano slightly into place. He ran his fingers over the keys for a moment before starting, like greeting an old friend. Then the music began, steady and patient. A woman who worked in an office building nearby had walked past him for weeks without paying attention. Her mornings were always rushed. She checked emails while walking, thinking about deadlines before the day even started. The piano had been nothing more than background noise. One morning something changed. She slowed down without meaning to. The melody felt familiar, not because she knew the song, but because it carried a feeling she could not ignore. It sounded like the quiet moment after a long day when everything finally becomes still. She stood there longer than she planned. The man's face showed no performance, no attempt to impress anyone. His fingers moved carefully, like he was choosing each note for a reason. When the song ended, he did not look up for applause. He simply started another melody. The woman left, but the sound stayed with her. Days passed and she began noticing small details. The music shifted throughout the day. In the morning it felt gentle, almost welcoming. Around midday it became brighter, matching the louder energy of the square. In the evening the melodies slowed, carrying something reflective, like the day quietly closing. Other people began to notice too, though they rarely spoke about it. A delivery driver paused one afternoon, leaning against his bike longer than necessary. A young student sat on the steps nearby, pretending to scroll on a phone while listening closely. An elderly man stood with his hands behind his back, eyes closed, as if remembering something far away. The blind man never announced anything. He did not ask people to stay. He just played. One afternoon a child stopped directly in front of the piano. The child did not say anything at first, only listened. The man's fingers shifted into a lighter tune, playful and curious. The child smiled immediately. It looked less like coincidence and more like recognition, as if the music had noticed the child before the child spoke. The child laughed and spun once before running back to a parent. The man's expression remained calm, but his hands carried that same playful feeling for a few minutes longer before slowly changing again. A quiet pattern was forming, though no one could fully explain it. The office woman returned on purpose one day. She stood to the side where she could watch without feeling obvious. A tired-looking man stopped near the piano, shoulders heavy, movements slow. The music shifted again. The melody softened, slower, almost comforting. The tired man did not drop money. He simply stood there, breathing differently than when he arrived. When he left, his shoulders looked slightly lighter. The woman felt a strange thought cross her mind. It felt like the music was responding to people, not performing for them. That idea stayed with her. The blind man's routine remained simple. He took short breaks, drinking water, sometimes sitting quietly with his hands resting on the keys without playing. During those pauses, he seemed to listen more than anyone else in the square. Footsteps, voices, laughter, distant arguments. Everything moved around him, and he absorbed it without needing to see. People often assumed blindness created distance from the world. Watching him made it feel like the opposite. He appeared deeply connected to things others ignored. One rainy afternoon, the square became less crowded. The sound of raindrops mixed with the piano, creating a gentle rhythm that felt almost planned. Only a few people remained nearby, standing under small shelters. The man continued playing, unbothered by the weather. A woman sitting on a bench quietly wiped her eyes. No one paid attention except the blind man, though he never looked toward her. The music shifted again, carrying a slow warmth that filled the empty space between raindrops. The woman stayed until the song ended. She did not approach him. She simply nodded to herself and left. Moments like that happened often, small and unnoticed unless someone was really watching. The office woman began arriving earlier some days just to listen. She noticed that he rarely repeated melodies the same way twice. Even when the tune felt similar, the emotion changed. It felt alive, shaped by the moment rather than memorized. She wondered how he did it. One morning she gathered the courage to speak. Her voice was careful, almost hesitant. She thanked him for the music. He smiled slightly, not the kind of smile meant for politeness, but one that showed he recognized the feeling behind her words. He asked how her morning was. The question was simple, but the way he asked made it feel real. She answered honestly without planning to. Stress, tiredness, small worries, things she usually kept inside. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once and placed his hands back on the piano. The melody that followed felt different, lighter but steady, not ignoring worry, but walking beside it. She felt something shift inside her that she could not explain. After that, she watched more closely. He did not need long conversations. Sometimes he only heard a few words, a sigh, the rhythm of footsteps. Yet the music changed as if he understood something deeper than what was spoken. Whispers began spreading among regular visitors. Not loud conversations, just small comments. People said the music felt personal. Someone mentioned that he seemed to hear feelings. Another person joked that the piano talked for him. No one asked directly. The quiet mystery made the experience more meaningful. The man never claimed anything special. When people complimented him, he thanked them softly. When someone asked how he learned to play like that, he said he listened. That was all. Listening seemed simple, but watching him made it feel rare. The square remained busy, noisy, distracted. Yet around the piano there was a small pocket of stillness that appeared every day. Not silence, but attention. People slowed without realizing it. Some stayed only seconds, others minutes. A few returned regularly without admitting why. One evening as the sun lowered, the music carried a deep calm that spread through the air. The office woman stood again at her usual spot. She noticed something she had not before. The man tilted his head slightly between melodies, as if recognizing specific people passing by without seeing them. The realization felt important. He was not playing into the crowd. He was playing to individuals inside it. That thought stayed with her long after she left. The next morning she arrived earlier than ever. The square was quieter, the air cooler. The man touched the keys and began a melody that felt like the beginning of something rather than a continuation. She stood there, listening carefully, and for the first time she was certain of one thing. The music was not random. It carried intention, observation, and something that felt like messages. Not spoken, not written, but understood by those willing to pause. Most people still walked past without noticing. Life remained fast. The noise of the world did not disappear. But slowly, quietly, a few people were starting to hear more than music. And the blind man kept playing, patient as always, sending something into the air that did not demand attention, yet stayed with those who allowed themselves to listen. The curiosity did not arrive all at once. It grew slowly, like a quiet question that refused to leave. The woman who worked nearby found herself listening differently now. She was no longer hearing only music. She was watching reactions, small changes in people's faces, pauses that lasted a little longer than expected. The blind man continued his routine exactly the same. He arrived early, greeted the piano with his fingertips, and began playing without any announcement. Nothing about his behavior suggested he was doing something unusual, yet the feeling around him kept changing. One morning, a young man stopped near the piano while speaking on the phone. His voice carried frustration. He paced back and forth, running a hand through his hair. The music shifted into a steady rhythm, calm but firm, like someone reminding another person to breathe. The young man's pacing slowed. He ended the call and stood still for a moment before leaving. Could have been coincidence. That was what most people would assume. But moments like that kept repeating. The woman began noticing patterns. The music softened when someone seemed tired. It brightened around laughter. Sometimes it held a quiet sadness that matched a person standing nearby without saying a word. It felt less like performance and more like response. She started sitting on the steps during her lunch break instead of eating at her desk. Others did the same, though they rarely spoke to each other. There was an unspoken understanding that something meaningful existed in that space, something difficult to explain out loud. A student who visited often finally gathered courage to speak to the blind man. The conversation was short, gentle. The student asked how he chose what to play. The man smiled slightly and said he listened first. The answer sounded simple, almost obvious, but it did not feel small. Listening was not just hearing words. Watching him made that clear. The student returned with a notebook one day, not to write music, but to write observations. Footsteps, voices, pauses in conversation. The way people stood when they were worried or relaxed. The student realized the blind man seemed to notice these details naturally. Online, small posts began appearing. Nothing viral yet, just quiet mentions. People described a street piano player whose music felt strangely personal. Some wrote that the songs arrived at the exact moment they needed them. Others said the experience felt like someone understood them without asking questions. The blind man did not know any of this. Or if he did, he never showed it. One afternoon, the square was crowded with noise. Conversations overlapped, vehicles passed, phones rang. In the middle of that chaos, a woman pushing a stroller stopped suddenly. She looked exhausted, eyes heavy, movements slow. The music shifted into something soft and steady, almost like a lullaby but not meant for a child alone. The woman's shoulders lowered. She closed her eyes for a few seconds. When she opened them, she smiled faintly. Not because everything was fixed, but because something felt lighter. She whispered thank you before moving on. The office woman felt the same quiet realization return stronger than before. The music was not solving problems. It was acknowledging them. That difference mattered. A delivery driver who visited often started timing breaks around the piano. He never spoke much, but one day he left a small note in the box instead of money. The note simply said, "You don't know me, but the music helps." The blind man ran his fingers over the paper slowly, as if feeling the message rather than reading it. He placed the note carefully inside his bag and continued playing. By now, regular listeners began noticing each other. Not through conversation, but through familiarity. The same faces appeared at similar times. Some stood, some sat, some listened while pretending to do other things. The piano created a quiet community without introductions. The woman started paying attention to the moments between songs. The blind man often paused briefly, tilting his head, listening to the movement around him. It looked like he was gathering pieces of the world before turning them into sound. She wondered what he heard that others missed. One evening, a man stood near the piano longer than anyone else. His expression carried something heavy, something private. The music began slowly, uncertain at first, then grew steadier, warmer. Felt like reassurance rather than sadness. The man wiped his face quickly and left before the song ended. No one commented, yet several people had noticed. The idea that the piano carried messages started spreading more clearly now, though people rarely used that exact word. They described feelings instead. Comfort, recognition, relief, quiet encouragement. Each description was different, but the pattern was the same. The blind man remained unchanged by the attention. He still thanked people softly, still accepted small conversations, still played as if no one was watching. One day the office woman decided to test her own thought. She approached him after a difficult morning. Her voice carried tension she tried to hide. She did not explain details. She only said it had been a hard day already. He nodded once, not asking questions. The melody that followed did not pretend everything was fine. Carried weight at first, slow and honest. Then, gradually, small brighter notes appeared, not overwhelming, just present. The music felt like someone walking beside her rather than pulling her forward. She felt tears rise unexpectedly. Not dramatic tears, just the kind that come when someone feels understood without explanation. That was the moment she stopped thinking of it as coincidence. Others experienced similar moments. A teenager sat quietly after a stressful exam and heard a melody that felt steady, grounding. An elderly visitor who often walked alone heard tunes that sounded like memory. Familiar warmth without specific words. A worker finishing a long shift paused and felt the music match exhaustion before gently lifting it. No announcements, no claims, just repetition of small human moments. The student with the notebook eventually spoke again to the blind man, this time asking if he remembered people by sound. He smiled and said voices carry stories. Footsteps carry energy. Silence carries meaning too. He explained it simply, like something anyone could notice if they slowed down enough. The student wrote that sentence down carefully. Online posts slowly increased. Someone shared a short video showing how the music changed as different people approached. Comments appeared from strangers saying they felt the emotion even through a screen. Still, the attention remained gentle, not overwhelming. In the square, life continued as usual. Noise, movement, urgency, none of that disappeared. But the space around the piano felt different now for those who noticed. It became a place where people allowed themselves a few seconds of honesty. The blind man never rushed songs. He let melodies breathe, leaving space between notes. That space felt important, like room for listeners to place their own feelings inside. The woman realized something else. He was not trying to be right about what people felt. He was offering possibilities. Sounds that said, "I hear something," without demanding explanation. That quiet respect made people trust the moment. One afternoon, a small group stood listening together without speaking. Strangers sharing the same piece of music, each experiencing something different yet connected. No introductions, no conversation, just presence. When the song ended, they left separately, but the shared stillness remained. The idea of messages became clearer, though they were not literal messages. No words, no instructions. They were emotional responses shaped into sound. Recognition turned into melody. Attention turned into rhythm. The blind man continued exactly as before. The woman often wondered if he understood the impact he was having. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't measure it the way others did. His focus never looked like performance or influence. It looked like care. Care expressed quietly. As weeks passed, the square felt less like a place people rushed through and more like a place some people passed through differently. Not everyone noticed. Many still walked by without hearing anything unusual. That did not seem to matter. The messages were not meant for everyone at once. One evening, as light faded and the crowd thinned, the music carried a gentle warmth that felt almost like gratitude. The woman sat on the steps again, watching the familiar routine that now felt meaningful rather than ordinary. She realized the biggest change was not the music itself. It was the way people listened once they allowed themselves to believe the music was listening back. That idea stayed with her. The blind man finished the song and rested his hands lightly on the keys. For a moment he did nothing, simply breathing, listening to the quiet spaces between footsteps and distant sounds. Then he began another melody, different again, shaped by whoever stood nearby. The square remained busy. Life remained complicated. Problems did not disappear. But something small continued to happen every day, moments where people felt noticed without explanation. And slowly, quietly, more people were beginning to understand that the piano was not just playing songs. It was answering. Long before people began noticing the music in the square, the blind man's life had moved in a very different direction. There was a time when he walked through crowded places without thinking about sound, when faces were clearer than footsteps, when music was something he enjoyed but did not depend on. He had not grown up dreaming of playing piano in public spaces. Music existed in his life quietly, like a companion that stayed nearby but did not demand attention. Work, responsibilities, and ordinary routines filled most of his days. He moved like everyone else, busy, focused, sometimes tired, sometimes hopeful. The change did not happen in one dramatic moment. It came through a period of loss, confusion, and adjustment that stretched longer than he expected. When his sight faded, the world did not suddenly stop. It continued moving at the same speed, but he felt left behind by its pace. At first, the hardest part was not practical things. People helped with directions, daily tasks, small adjustments. The difficult part was the silence that appeared inside him. Conversations felt shorter. Spaces felt larger. He could hear life happening around him, but he struggled to feel connected to it. Music returned during that time, not as entertainment but as comfort. Sitting near a piano gave structure to days that felt uncertain. He did not start with skill. He started with repetition, simple notes, slow progress, patience that he had not known he possessed. Someone had once told him that when one sense fades, others grow stronger, but it did not feel magical. Felt like learning a new language slowly, one sound at a time. He began noticing small details he had ignored before. The difference between hurried footsteps and relaxed ones. The way voices changed when people smiled, even if they did not say it directly. The silence that followed heavy thoughts. The piano became the place where he explored those observations. In the beginning, he played for himself. Notes helped organize emotions that were difficult to explain. Some days the music sounded uncertain. Other days it carried quiet strength. He did not label feelings. He allowed them to move through sound. There was one moment he remembered clearly, though he rarely spoke about it. He had been sitting alone in a shared space where a piano stood unused most of the time. Frustration had built quietly that day. Not loud anger, just the exhaustion of adjusting to a life that felt unfamiliar. He started playing without intention, letting fingers move wherever they needed. Someone sat nearby and listened without interrupting. When the song ended, the person simply said that the music felt honest. No praise about skill, no dramatic words. Just that one sentence. It stayed with him. That moment shifted something small but important. He realized music did not need to be perfect to be meaningful. It only needed to be real. From then on, he stopped trying to play correctly and started trying to play truthfully. Listening became his focus. He noticed how people carried emotions in everyday sounds. A chair being pulled quickly. A sigh that tried to stay quiet. Laughter that lasted a second too long because someone needed it. These details felt like pieces of stories moving around him constantly. The piano gave him a way to respond without interrupting those stories. At first, he played in small indoor places where few people paid attention. Waiting rooms, community centers, quiet corners where music existed in the background. But sometimes someone would stop longer than expected. Sometimes someone would speak afterward, saying the music felt like it understood something they had not explained. Those moments did not feel like success. They felt like connection. He did not believe he was reading people perfectly. He only believed that attention mattered. When he listened carefully, his hands moved differently. The music became less about performance and more about presence. Time passed, and playing became part of daily structure rather than an occasional activity. He practiced not only notes but patience, allowing silence between melodies, allowing mistakes, allowing emotion to exist without needing to fix it. Eventually, the idea of playing outside appeared. Public spaces felt intimidating at first. Noise was unpredictable. Movement was constant. But there was also something honest about those environments. People were not expecting anything. Reactions were real because attention was not planned. The old piano in the square arrived through simple circumstances, not big planning. Someone offered it, someone helped move it, and suddenly the possibility existed. The first days were uncertain. Many people walked past without noticing. Some listened briefly. A few spoke. He did not measure impact. He focused on consistency. Each day he arrived, he listened before playing. The square had its own rhythm. Mornings carried anticipation. Afternoons carried pressure. Evenings carried reflection. Within that rhythm, individuals moved with their own emotional pace. His goal was not to identify stories perfectly but to acknowledge presence. The more he played, the clearer something became. People rarely needed solutions from strangers. They needed recognition, a moment where their internal world felt seen, even without explanation. Music could offer that quietly. There were days when he doubted himself. Days when the music felt distant, when listening felt difficult, when personal worries grew louder than the sounds around him. On those days he played anyway, not forcing meaning, simply staying present until the connection returned. He remembered the sentence from years earlier, "The music felt honest." That became his quiet guide. If the notes were honest, they were enough. The square slowly became familiar not through sight but through sound patterns. Specific footsteps that returned daily. Voices that appeared at similar times. Laughter groups, quiet individuals, hurried conversations. He did not know faces, but he recognized presence. Recognition shaped the music. A person who often sounded tense received steadier melodies over time. Someone who laughed easily brought lighter rhythms. People changed and the music changed with them. It was not planned. It was responsive. He never described it as sending messages. In his mind, he was answering the world as he heard it. The piano was simply the tool that allowed that answer to exist outside his thoughts. The memory of his earlier loneliness stayed with him, not as pain but as understanding. He knew how invisible people could feel even in crowded places. That knowledge guided his attention more than any musical training. If he could create even a brief moment where someone felt less alone, the effort felt meaningful. Back in the present, listeners in the square sensed that depth even without knowing the history behind it. The music carried patience that rarely came from practice alone. Carried experience, adjustment, acceptance. The office woman often wondered what had shaped him, though she never asked directly. She sensed the music came from lived moments rather than theory. That difference gave it weight. One afternoon, the blind man paused between songs longer than usual. The sounds of the square moved around him. Distant conversation, footsteps, a child asking questions, wind brushing against objects. He breathed slowly, hands resting on the keys. When he began playing again, the melody carried memory. Not sadness, not nostalgia, but acknowledgement of a path that had not been easy yet had led somewhere meaningful. Listeners felt it without explanation. The student with the notebook wrote fewer observations that day and listened more instead. Some things could not be described clearly in words. They were understood through feeling. The blind man did not think about how far the music had traveled from those early uncertain days. He did not compare then and now. Progress for him was simple, continuing to listen, continuing to respond, continuing to show up. The past was not something he performed. It lived quietly inside the way he chose notes, the patience in pauses, the softness that appeared even in stronger melodies. Loss had taken one way of seeing the world. It had also opened another. As evening approached, the square grew calmer. The music slowed naturally, matching the shift in energy. The office woman sat again on the steps, realizing that understanding his past was not necessary to feel its presence. The piano carried it already. Each melody held small pieces of learning, how to sit with uncertainty, how to notice subtle emotion, how to offer connection without demanding attention. Those pieces formed the quiet foundation beneath every song. The blind man finished the melody and rested his hands. For a moment he simply listened to the fading sound, the way it blended into ordinary noise. That blending felt important. Music was not separate from life. It was part of it. He began another tune, different again, shaped by whoever stood nearby in that moment. His past remained invisible to most people passing the square. They saw only a man playing piano, calm, consistent, unremarkable in appearance. But within the music lived years of adjustment, quiet growth, and a decision made long ago. If he could not see the world the way he once did, he would feel it more carefully. And through the piano, he would answer what he felt. The day that changed everything did not begin differently. The square woke up the same way it always did: footsteps, distant traffic, quiet conversations mixing with morning air. The blind man arrived, touched the piano keys gently, and began playing without knowing that this ordinary day would travel far beyond the space he knew. People moved past as usual. Some listened briefly, some didn't notice. The music carried a calm beginning, soft notes that felt like an invitation rather than a performance. The office woman stood nearby again, now part of the quiet group of regular listeners who no longer needed a reason to stop. Late in the morning, someone approached the piano slowly. The person did not speak. Even without seeing, the blind man sensed hesitation in the footsteps, the kind that pause, move, pause again. There was a heaviness in the silence that followed, something fragile, like someone holding many thoughts at once. His fingers shifted before any conversation happened. The melody began uncertain, almost searching. It held space instead of direction, as if asking permission to exist beside whatever that person was carrying. People nearby felt the change immediately. Conversations lowered. Movement slowed without instruction. The person stood closer, still silent. The music deepened. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just honest. It sounded like recognition, like someone saying, without words, that difficult feelings were allowed to be present. The office woman felt her chest tighten, not from sadness, but from how clear that intention felt. A young passerby stopped and quietly lifted a phone, not to create something viral, but to capture a moment that felt meaningful. The recording began almost accidentally. The melody continued, slowly shifting. Small brighter notes appeared between heavier ones, not replacing them but existing beside them. It felt like reassurance that emotions could change without being forced away. Several listeners wiped their eyes quietly. No one spoke. The person near the piano exhaled deeply, a sound of release more than relief. It was subtle, but the blind man heard it. His hands responded immediately, guiding the music into something steadier. Not happiness, not resolution, but balance. That shift was what people felt most. The recording captured everything. The pause before the melody, the quiet crowd, the gradual movement from heaviness to warmth. It did not look like a performance. It looked like a conversation without words. When the song ended, there was no applause, just silence that carried respect. The person whispered thank you so softly that only those closest heard it. The blind man nodded once, as he always did, and rested his hands on the keys. The moment could have stayed there, one of many quiet encounters that lived only in memory. But the recording continued its own journey. Later that day, the video was shared online with a simple caption about a street piano player whose music seemed to understand people. There were no dramatic claims, just the clip. At first, responses were small. Comments from strangers describing how the music made them feel calm even through a screen. People said it felt real. Others said they could sense the shift in emotion without knowing the story behind it. The video spread slowly, then faster. By the next morning, more people arrived at the square than usual. Not a crowd-chasing spectacle, but individuals curious about the feeling they had seen online. The blind man noticed the difference in sound. More footsteps pausing, more quiet spaces forming around the piano. He did not change his routine. He played the same way he always had, listening first. Some visitors approached to speak. They thanked him for the video, for the music, for moments that had helped them during difficult days. He responded gently, often saying he was simply playing what he heard. The answer surprised people because it carried no sense of achievement. Attention continued growing, but the atmosphere remained calm because he treated every interaction the same, one person at a time. More recordings appeared. Short clips showing how melodies changed when different people stood nearby. Viewers noticed patterns the regular listeners already understood. Comments described the music as comforting, grounding, human. The office woman watched all of this with mixed feelings. She was glad others were experiencing the same connection, but she worried attention might change the quiet honesty that made the space special. Yet each day she returned, the routine looked unchanged. The blind man still arrived early, still touched the keys like greeting a friend, still listened more than he spoke. Invitations began arriving through people who visited in person. Community groups asked if he would play at small gatherings. Hospitals requested quiet performances in waiting areas. Shelters reached out, explaining that music like his could offer moments of peace. He did not accept everything. He chose slowly, guided by whether the space felt right rather than how many people would see it. The first time he played outside the square, he approached it the same way, listening to the environment before playing. Those present noticed immediately that the music adapted to each place. The approach was not tied to location. It was tied to attention. Stories followed. A nurse describing how patients relaxed during a short performance. A volunteer explaining that people stayed longer in shared spaces because the music made them feel safe. None of these stories were dramatic. They were small shifts that added up. Back in the square, more strangers stopped daily. Some came because of the video. Others came because someone told them about the feeling. Not everyone experienced it the same way, but many stayed longer than they planned. The student with the notebook stopped writing entirely for a while. Observing had turned into experiencing. Some moments did not need documentation. The blind man never referred to what was happening as impact. When people explained how far the video had reached, he listened with curiosity but returned quickly to the piano. The present moment mattered more than the number of people watching. One afternoon, someone asked if he realized he was helping people. He paused before answering. He said he did not know what people carried when they arrived, but he believed listening was always useful. The simplicity of that response stayed with those who heard it. The square changed subtly. It did not become crowded or loud with attention. Instead, it became more intentional. People approached the piano with patience. Phones appeared sometimes, but many lowered them quickly, choosing to listen directly. The original video continued spreading, not because of dramatic editing or shocking events, but because viewers recognized sincerity. In a world filled with noise, quiet honesty stood out. The office woman noticed something important during those weeks. The music did not become more complex with attention. If anything, it became softer, as if the blind man was protecting the original purpose, connection rather than performance. That decision shaped everything that followed. One evening, after playing longer than usual, he sat quietly while people slowly left. The air carried a calm that felt shared. He ran his fingers lightly across the keys without pressing them, feeling the shape of the instrument that had carried so many unseen conversations. The video had reached thousands by then, maybe more. Messages arrived through people who visited, describing how they listened online during difficult nights, long shifts, moments of uncertainty. He accepted those stories with gratitude but did not hold onto them as pressure. The next morning, he returned at the same time as always. The square sounded familiar again. Footsteps, distant voices, ordinary life continuing. He touched the keys and began another melody shaped by whoever happened to be there. No announcement about what had changed. No acknowledgement that anything was different. Yet everything was different. People now arrived knowing that the piano might speak to them in ways words could not. And he continued playing, not trying to reach millions but responding to one presence at a time, the same way he always had. The moment that reached far beyond the square did not transform him. It revealed him, and he kept listening. The attention did not fade after the video spread. But something important stayed the same, the blind man's routine. Each morning he arrived with the same quiet steps, greeted the piano the same way, and began playing without expectation. The square still carried ordinary life, yet for many people it now held meaning beyond movement. Some visitors came only once, curious after seeing the video. Others returned regularly, not because they expected something dramatic, but because the space allowed them to slow down. The piano had become a place where people felt permitted to pause without explanation. Letters began appearing. They were simple notes placed in the small box near the piano. Some were handwritten carefully. Others looked rushed, written during short breaks. Many did not include names. They spoke about long days, quiet struggles, moments when the music had arrived at the right time. None of the notes asked for anything. They only described feeling less alone. The blind man read them slowly at home, not searching for praise, but listening to the emotions inside the words the same way he listened to footsteps in the square. He kept some notes folded carefully, not as reminders of impact, but as reminders of connection. He continued accepting invitations to play in different places, choosing spaces where listening mattered more than performance. Hospitals, small community rooms, waiting areas where time felt heavy. These environments carried the same quiet need he had felt years earlier in himself. Each place sounded different. Each place shaped the music differently. A nurse once told him that people waiting for news often did not know what to say to each other. When the piano played, conversations sometimes became easier, or silence became more comfortable. The blind man did not see those moments, but he heard the shift in breathing, the change in movement. That was enough. Back in the square, the office woman noticed something else changing. People who listened began acting differently outside the music. Small things. Someone holding a door longer, someone offering a seat, someone speaking more gently. None of it was dramatic, but the pattern was real. The piano was not instructing people. It was reminding them of attention. The student who once carried a notebook started bringing friends instead. Not to observe, but to experience. The delivery driver who left the first note sometimes stayed after work, sitting quietly without rushing home. Strangers occasionally spoke to each other after listening, short conversations that felt easier because the music had already created a shared moment. The blind man never pointed this out. He focused on the next melody, the next presence, the next quiet response. Online, the video continued reaching new viewers. Some watched once. Others returned repeatedly, especially during difficult nights when noise felt overwhelming. Messages reached the square through visitors who said they listened from far away and felt the same recognition. Distance did not remove the feeling. He responded the same way to every story, gratitude, then listening. One afternoon, a child approached the piano with a question that adults often avoided asking. The child asked how he knew what people needed. He smiled gently and said he did not know. He only paid attention and allowed the music to be honest. The answer sounded simple, but the adults nearby felt its depth. Knowing was not required. Caring was. Seasons changed, and the square looked different in small ways, different sounds, different rhythms, different patterns of movement. The piano remained, slightly more worn but carrying more history. Each scratch, each softened key held pieces of countless unseen conversations. The office woman realized she no longer came because she was curious. She came because the space had become part of her routine in the same way the piano was part of his. Listening had changed how she moved through other parts of her life. She noticed coworkers more, heard tone in conversations more clearly, paused before responding. The music had not given answers. It had adjusted attention. Many others experienced similar shifts. The blind man sometimes thought about the earlier years when loneliness felt heavy and connection felt distant. He did not compare those years with the present as success or failure. He saw them as steps that shaped how he listened now. Without that period, he might have played differently, technically correct but emotionally distant. Instead, the piano carried experience rather than perfection. One evening, as the square grew quiet, he played a melody that felt like reflection. Not about attention or reach, but about continuity. The idea that small consistent actions could travel further than dramatic moments. Several regular listeners recognized that feeling without needing explanation. A visitor asked if he planned to do something bigger, concerts, recordings, larger stages. He paused before answering, not dismissing the idea, but considering what bigger meant. He said sometimes bigger was simply continuing. The response stayed with those who heard it. Continuing required patience. It required returning even on days when energy felt low, when attention felt distracting, when life outside the square carried its own challenges. Consistency was quieter than growth, but often more meaningful. The letters kept arriving. Some described recovery. Some described grief. Some described ordinary stress that felt lighter for a few minutes because music existed beside it. The blind man did not separate big stories from small ones. Emotion was emotion. Attention applied equally. He began keeping a small box at home, not organized, not displayed. Just a place where reminders of connection lived. Occasionally he opened it, running fingers over folded paper, feeling texture rather than rereading every word. The physical presence mattered as much as the message. In the square, the atmosphere no longer felt like curiosity. Felt like understanding. People knew the piano would not solve problems. They came because it acknowledged them. One day, the original person from the widely shared video returned quietly. No announcement, no attempt to recreate the moment. The blind man recognized the footsteps, the pause, the familiar silence. The melody that followed carried recognition without repetition. The past was honored, but the present was allowed to be new. That was how every connection worked. No two songs were identical because no two moments were identical. The office woman watched that interaction and realized the story had never been about a single event reaching millions. It was about a pattern that continued long after attention shifted elsewhere. Quiet care repeated over time. As months passed, fewer people spoke about the video itself. The square did not depend on it anymore. The music existed independently, just as it had before. The difference was that more people now understood what they were hearing. Understanding changed listening. The blind man finished a melody one evening and sat with his hands resting on the keys longer than usual. The sounds of the square moved around him. Laughter in the distance. Someone closing a shop. Footsteps heading home. Ordinary life continuing, exactly as it should. He thought about messages, though he rarely used that word. If messages existed, they were simple ones. You are noticed, your feelings are allowed. Connection does not require explanation. The piano had carried those ideas without language. He did not consider the story finished. There was no final performance, no moment that closed the experience. The purpose had never been an ending. It had always been continuation. The next morning he returned again. The same routine. The same greeting of the keys. The same first notes entering the air before most people noticed. Yet every day was different because every listener arrived carrying something new. The office woman stood nearby as she had many times before. She realized that the square at the beginning of this story and the square now looked similar from the outside. Busy, distracted, ordinary. But for those who had listened, it felt transformed. Not louder, not grander, just more human. The blind man played another melody shaped by whoever happened to be there at that moment. No announcement about meaning. No explanation of impact. Just attention turning into sound again. People paused. Some only for seconds. Some longer. Each carried the music away in different ways. A calmer breath. A quieter thought. A small reminder to notice someone else. The piano remained where it had always been. And the messages continued. Not spoken, not written, but understood by anyone willing to listen.